Prime ACC contenders for realignment. Let's stack them up. ACC schools, football programs, hand over those resumes. We're going to give them a look and see if they make the cut for the big leagues, the Power 2, the SEC, or the Big Ten. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, breaking down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis based on your participation. Appreciate you being here. Please like the video, share the videos out on social media, and of course, subscribe. Let's break it down from a number of angles. Those ACC contenders who are looking to move on to the Big Ten or the SEC and have a realistic shot at doing so. And of course, Florida State leading the charge. They are the most vocal in the courts and in the public forum. They hope that they've at least got one step out the door to rid themselves of the ACC and the grant of rights. And as a football program, they are on the rise under Mike Norvell. 127 wins, 54 losses since 2010. Norvell had to rebrand the culture, rework the roster, build them back up through the transfer portal, most notably, and of course got them to their first ACC championship since 2014 this past season. Bobby Bowden, probably more than any one individual in the history of college football, responsible for building a great football program. Florida State was in the ashes in the mid to late 1970s until Bobby Bowden made them a contender and then made them the most consistently elite program in the country with 14 consecutive top 5 finishes. Florida State can win at the highest level if they've got the resources, because they certainly have the recruiting footprint, they've got the national brand, and they've got the desire as a university. They're showing us that right now, that they want to win at the highest level and win championships. In terms of popularity on TV, when Florida State's good, they're just about as good as anyone in drawing eyeballs to the TV sets. Over 40 million in 2023 as we look at network television ratings. We do not have access to the ACC network ratings, so keep in mind that that is hurting some of the lesser schools that we will review. However, those audiences are generally in the 100,000 to 500,000 range for those games on those regional networks, and the ACC network coverage is nothing close to what it is for the SEC network, so it modifies these numbers slightly, but not significantly. Florida State has drawn over 81 million views on network television the past 3 football seasons. And even though the market size of Tallahassee is not awesome, it is growing at number 105, up 3 spots from the last time we gave it a look in 2021. The academic ranking also getting better, and this is a difficult number to move up the scale. It's very competitive, and based on U.S. News and World Report, Florida State has gone up the rankings from 55 to 53 just in the past 3 years. Florida State was in the final round to get the AAU status. They did not get it this last time that it was voted on, but they are positioning themselves to be able to acquire that very soon. The best football program in the past decade is not debatable. It's Dabo Swinney's Clemson Tigers, especially from 2015 through 2020. Dominant, elite, one of the best programs in the country. Slipping off, of course, for the past 3 seasons with 1 ACC championship and no college football playoff appearances. 157-35 is the record since 2010. And again, elite with conference championships from 2015 through 2020. College football playoff appearances every year, 2 national championships, 4 national championship games. They have slipped the past 3 seasons at 10-3, 11-3 with the conference championship, and then 9-4 this past season with a bowl win. Will Dabo Swinney get them back to elite status? Well, he's probably going to have to dive into the transfer portal to make that happen. The recruiting has really not slipped, but Clemson certainly has. Still a fine football program, still arguably the best in the conference. Now, if we look historically, Clemson football, from the time they won a national championship in 1981 until Dabo Swinney was elevated from wide receiver coach to head coach, a top 15 to 20 program that typically was posting a lot of 8-4, 9-3 kind of seasons. On television, Clemson is a major draw, and they're a consistent draw and have been since they've established themselves to be one of the best. This past season, they drew over 20 million viewers on network television. They had a big season in 2022 of 31 million. Put it all together for the past 3 seasons, they have drawn over 74 million views on network television, most of those appearances on ABC and ESPN. Clemson's buried in South Carolina, and they really have no real TV market. Atlanta's close, within a couple hours, the 7th-rated market in the country. But, of course, most of those people you got to think are NFL fans and love those Georgia Bulldogs. Charlotte's at 22, and then in-state Columbia, South Carolina, the home of the Gamecocks, their arch rival, is the 76th largest TV market in the country. However, Clemson has proven with the aforementioned numbers that they draw from coast to coast. This ranking academically might be a bit of a troubling sign. Clemson did not stack up well against its competitors in the ACC academically prior to 2024. They were number 75 the last time we checked 3 years ago. They have dropped to number 86 nationally in regards to public university rankings. Their enrollment has gone up by about 2,500 to 22,500 during that time, and they actually have a strong endowment at over $1 billion. Maybe the most intriguing program build in the history of college football was Howard Schnellenberger in Miami, taking over in 1979 for a football program that almost was defunct. He lifted it to national championship status in 1983, and that led to a dominant couple decades, winning a 5th national championship in 2001. But since then, Miami football has not been the same. Winning just 58% of their games over the past 15 to 20 years, Miami is 102-74. Sounds like a decent record for other schools, but not championship contending teams for the last 20 years. If somebody would have said when Miami joined the ACC from the Big East in 2004 that the Hurricanes 20 years later would not have a ACC championship, had only appeared in one ACC championship game, that would have been unthinkable. There is the potential. There is the possibility. They're coming off 5-7 and 7-6 under Mario Cristobal, and the recruiting, though, has been exceptional under Cristobal. Number 4 in the nation this past recruiting cycle. Is Miami ready for another surge? The marginal status of Miami football has certainly hurt its national television numbers, despite it maintaining a brand status. They get relegated to the ACC network far too often. They drew over 13.5 million views in 2021 in network television games, 7.3 million in 2022, and 16 million this past season. That totals 36.8 million over those 3 seasons. Miami draws from one of the biggest groups of television markets in all the United States. Miami itself is number 18. However, Tampa's close, Orlando's close, West Palm Beach, basically South Florida is a huge population base. All of those markets are in the top 40 in the country. And of course, Miami's a national brand and has folks that have jumped on the bandwagon going back to the 1980s all over the country. In 2021, the academic rank was tied with Florida State at number 55 in the country. Despite gaining AAU status, Miami has dropped from 55 to 67. I don't know what that's attributed to. The enrollment has gone up 1,200 students to 12,500 currently, and the endowment is strong at $1.4 billion. Rarely in talking about realignment do we bring basketball into the conversation. Of course, men's college basketball is huge. It's popular, but it's been more popular in the past. It's declining. So there's only a handful of schools where it really moves the needle. Well, of course, Carolina Blue is one of those. But looking at football, football's been up and down. Mack Brown is in his 2nd stint at North Carolina. Of course, the first time he came around, he took a moribund, awful football program and lifted it to national top 10 status. He's attempting to do the same this time around. Larry Fedora had only won 5 games in 2 years prior to Mack Brown. And then Brown lifts them to an Orange Bowl in 2020, their first major bowl appearance in decades and decades and decades. But only 9-5 and 8-5 the past 2 seasons. They've kind of settled into a fringe top 25 team. 98 and 81 since 2010. It has definitely been an up and down program, but draws decent viewers on network television, about 10 to 11 to 12 million per season on ABC and ESPN, 32.7 million over those 3 seasons. And the television markets are strong in North Carolina. This is one of the most robust, growing areas in terms of population. It has been for decades, with Charlotte now a top 21 market. Greenville's up there. Raleigh-Durham's in the top 25. And Greensboro makes for another top 50 market that you would think that there would be interest for North Carolina football. Academically, North Carolina extremely strong, has been linked many times in conversations to the Big Ten, and actually has moved the needle just in the last few years, going from number 28 to number 22 in academic ranking since 2021. The enrollment has stayed around 20,000, and the endowment is substantial. We saw the numbers from Clemson and Florida State and Miami in the $1+ billion range. Multiply that 5 times. North Carolina's endowment is up to number 9 in the country at $5.2 billion. If you're looking for a football edition to increase the brand, the status, the competitiveness of your conference, don't look at the Wahoos. Virginia's been awful historically. One of the worst 5 to 10 Power 5 programs historically, and it's not been good since 2010 either. 69 wins, 100 losses. Bronco Mendenhall was doing a nice job, did win a division championship, got that team to an Orange Bowl appearance against Florida that particular season. Virginia basically doesn't make it outside the ACC network much, but when they do, people watch, probably watching the other team most of the time, but they did draw more than 8 million views in their ABC and ESPN games in 2023, and almost 19 million for the 3-year span that we are reviewing. I don't know if these television markets really speak to the Virginia situation, especially number 1 there with Washington, D.C., the 9th rated market in the country. But I'm sure that there are Virginia alums and fans in places like Norfolk, Richmond, and Roanoke, all top 100 markets. The academics at Virginia, this is the selling point. It's about potential. It's about academic strength. It's about money. Academically, this is the top 25 school in the country. Their enrollment is a bit over 17,000. The endowment is the 5th best, but it's dropped. I don't know what's going on here, what they've invested in, but from $10.5 billion 3 years ago to $9.8 billion, but it holds steady as the 5th highest endowment of any public university in the country. Atlanta, along with Houston, produces the most NFL players of any metro area in the United States. Just most of them don't go through Georgia Tech on their way to the pros. But what does Georgia Tech have to offer a major conference? An 84-91 record since 2010, which has really been weighted down by the lack of effectiveness by one Jeff Collins and Brent Key doing a nice job picking up the pieces for Collins. Of course, Paul Johnson experienced the most success at Georgia Tech since going back to the days of Bobby Ross and a national championship in 1990. Paul Johnson got this team to an Orange Bowl in 2009. Also, he was able to pull off another Orange Bowl appearance and a win over Mississippi State following 2014, and that was the last time that Georgia Tech made it to an ACC championship game. This program, though, from the time that there was an ACC championship game established, was appearing in as many of those games as the likes of Clemson, Florida State, and also Virginia Tech at the time. For decades, Georgia Tech has basically been a 7-5, 8-4 kind of program, with the opportunity to do better on occasion. Now, has that translated on television? Well, again, they are playing a lot of ACC network games. And of course, they've been a losing football team recently up until going 7-6 this past season. And these numbers do not reflect postseason numbers, as Georgia Tech defeated UCF in the Gasparilla Bowl this past year with about 1.5 to 2 million people watching that game. But they've drawn 26 million people on ABC and ESPN over the past 3 football seasons, drawing from that Atlanta market, which, despite its size, still growing at a ridiculous rate from number 10 in the country just 3 years ago all the way up to number 7. But again, don't know how many of those people are really invested in Georgia Tech football, but it's about potential. The academic ranking is strong and getting stronger. Number 38 3 years ago has risen to number 33. And the enrollment at a school like this typically doesn't move much because they want to keep the enrollment under control. Very high academic standards, but it has risen by 2,000 over the past 3 years to 18,500, and the endowment is extremely strong at $2.9 billion. Remember what we said about Bobby Bowden in building Florida State? Ditto Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech. If you could credit one guy for building a football program, he would certainly be one of the first guys that comes to mind. Took over Virginia Tech in the late 1980s. They were nothing in football. It took a little while, but won a Sugar Bowl in 1995 over Texas, and then they were off and running. Made a national championship game in 1999, of course, with Michael Vick at quarterback. And Frank Beamer's teams lived in the top 25, were frequently a top 10 finish in the AP poll, going to major bowl games on a regular basis through the last few years of his tenure. Now, they had fallen off in that post-2011 Sugar Bowl run, and we're winning 7 and 8 games, getting to bowl games. And then Justin Fuente took over. They had a couple nice seasons, but still were living in that end of the top 25 range, and now they've fallen off considerably. Brent Pry, in just his second season, lifted them to a bowl win and a 7 and 6 finish, so we'll see if he's able to rebound Virginia Tech football. And when Virginia Tech's not very good, they're not going to get put on TV because they don't have a market size that's going to justify putting a marginal or bad football team on network television. So they have lived on the ACC network primarily over the past few seasons. They drew 3 million viewers in their game against Florida State this past season. But again, they had a pretty marginal season, although it was a nice little bounce back from 3 and 8 to 7 and 6. But they came on down the stretch and played some bad non-conference opponents, so those games weren't placed on network television. They only had 5 million people watch them in their network TV games on ESPN and ABC for a total over 3 seasons of under 11 million people. Now, where are those people watching from? Well, they're probably just watching because they're Virginia Tech fans or they're college football fans, because Virginia Tech really does not have an accessible large TV market. I don't know that Washington, D.C. is a factor at number 9 in the country. Richmond's at 56, Roanoke, Virginia at 71. The academic standing of this school is number 47 in the country. According to U.S. News and World Report, the enrollment has topped 30,000, and the endowment is higher than Clemson, Florida State, Miami, and a few others at $1.9 billion. Now let's break down these schools and these football programs in terms of how they stack up in a rankings order against each other in each one of these categories. Let's look at the football first and foremost and how it stands right this second. We could have an argument between Clemson and Florida State. Florida State just finished 13-1. They won the ACC. Mike Norvell's doing an outstanding job. They are tearing it up in the transfer portal. The recruiting has been good, not exceptional, not necessarily quite at the rate that Clemson continues to recruit under Dabo Swinney, who did win an ACC championship in 2022. I know that the narrative is that Clemson has fallen off, and that is obvious, but we're talking about a fall off from being one of the top 2 programs in college football post-2015. Clemson's still strong. We'll see if Dabo can adjust to the transfer portal and make some moves there. I would still rate Clemson with a slight edge over Florida State because Norvell and this program has not proven it over a long period of time, but 10-3 and 13-1 is impressive. Miami, despite not playing well on the field, of course, Manny Diaz was struggling through a 21-16 run, and Mario Cristobal's only 12-13 in his 2 years at Miami. The recruiting has been outstanding under Cristobal, top 7 and then top 4 in the nation in his 2 recruiting cycles, and Diaz was recruiting in the top 10 to 15 in the nation. So they've got the roster and they're in a good position. So I'm going to continue to rank Miami, despite the lack of wins on the field, over North Carolina. Now the Heels, I would rank them higher, but the last 2 seasons have not been exceptional. Mack Brown took over and instantly made North Carolina a better football team, but it's plateaued, seriously plateaued to 8-5, 9-5 the last 2 years. Virginia Tech, again, the Brent Pry bounced back this past season to a nice bowl win at 7-6, but let's see if that lasts and if he's able to continue the momentum. Difficult place to recruit to. Georgia Tech, Brent Key doing a nice job, but consider if Miami takes a knee against Georgia Tech does not get the opportunity to go to a bowl game to finish 7-6. They're a 5-7 football team. And then, of course, Virginia is a clear number 7, coming off 2 3-win seasons under Tony Elliott. However, they played extremely tough. Outside of a couple blowouts, they played extremely well and down to the wire against a lot of decent teams last year. Keep an eye on the Cavaliers. Historically, it's another close call between Florida State, Miami, and Clemson. If you go all-time to the beginning of time, Clemson's probably the best. They've got the most wins, the best winning percentage, all of that. However, since 1980, of course, Florida State, Miami have been far superior. In spots, Florida State's been more consistent. When Miami's at its best, they can peak higher than anyone in this group, you would think, based on what they've shown us in the 80s and 90s. Again, historically, I give the nod to Florida State as being consistently elite for decades, and then being able to follow that up with a national championship under Jimbo Fisher and a top 5 finish now under Mike Norvell. So they've done it at times under 3 coaches, with, of course, Bobby Bowden laying the groundwork. Virginia Tech, Frank Beamer, that's their history right there. That's all their success, but they've shown that they can do it with the right guy in charge. Georgia Tech, North Carolina, along with Virginia Tech, I kind of put them in a same grouping. You can make all sorts of arguments. Georgia Tech, I group together with Virginia Tech and North Carolina. You can make an argument for any one of those 3 in any order. Georgia Tech, historically, if you go all the way back to the beginning of college football, has had a great success going back to the early portion of the 20th century. Over the past several decades, 7-8 win program. Most of the time, they certainly have bottomed out with a lot of 3-win seasons and need to have the right coach. They need to try to take some advantage of playing in Atlanta. North Carolina football, of course, plays in the shadow of its basketball program, but it's been a decent football program that's gone to bowl games most of the time, won 7 and 8 games most of the time, but does not hit that upper level. They've gone to a couple ACC championship games in the past decade and lost both of those games to Clemson. Then Virginia, again, it's not even close. It's historically a bad football program. At its very best, it's been an 8-4 team at spots during the 80s and 90s, and then most recently for 1 season under Bronco Mendenhall. Let's talk about realistic potential. Miami's is through the roof. They could stay home and take about half, not even half of the 4 and 5 stars within 50 miles and post a top 5 to 10 class in the nation in recruiting. They have a great academic school. They have so much going for them in so many ways that they should be better. They have made bad football hires. All you have to do is look at all their hires post Butch Davis, outside of Mark Richt, who had health issues, obviously, after he left Miami, and none of those guys succeeded anywhere else, before or after Miami. So what does that tell you? They've made bad football hires. Okay, Florida State has great potential. Of course, that's been obvious. They've fulfilled it many times. Clemson is maxed out under Dabo Swinney, and there's nothing wrong with maxing out, winning national championships and going to the playoffs every year. But we have seen the best of Clemson football, so if they can get back to close to that status, that would be pretty substantial. Georgia Tech's got the potential of being not only in Atlanta, but Georgia has exploded in regards to football talent, both the quality and quantity, and even surpassed California. North Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Virginia is how I see the potential of these schools as football programs moving forward. We talked about the Miami media market not just being Miami itself, but the conglomeration of a number of large markets in South Florida and people moving to Florida. The state's growing. It's been growing for decades and continues to do so. Also, there's a glam factor with South Beach, Miami celebrities. So Miami wins this battle over Georgia Tech simply because it's in Atlanta and there are NFL players standing on every street corner. North Carolina's at number 3. Florida State's at number 4. You've got Clemson, Virginia, and Virginia Tech. I'm pretty solid on that. Virginia just being much closer to Washington, D.C., and having the influence of a larger TV market if they could ever start winning some games. The Miami recruiting potential is otherworldly. They're tapping into it right now with Mario Cristobal with a couple top 10 classes. Georgia Tech sitting in Atlanta. We've addressed that. Florida State next, followed by North Carolina. The state of North Carolina in regards to football talent, underrated. Clearly a top 7 or 8 state in the country. Clemson draws from Georgia, South Carolina, and of course they can recruit nationally, but I'm basing these rankings just on the footprint. And of course Clemson's got some issues. The state of South Carolina in terms of high school football is not the best. Virginia's strong in terms of recruiting footprint, and so is Virginia Tech in that same state. Really, none of these football programs have an issue with recruiting. Drawing players from their location, that's not the problem. There are plenty of football players in the South and in these specific locations. In terms of academics, I don't consider North Carolina to be the breakaway winner here at number 1, but I do give them the nod based on the academic rankings we reviewed. Put North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia Tech in one grouping, and then the other 4 in another grouping, with Clemson the clear number 7 here. Florida State and Miami extremely close, as mentioned, tied in the U.S. News and World Report rankings as of 2021, and Virginia Tech, a surprising number 47 in the country. Hey, Mark, what about the other ACC programs? Boston College, Pitt, they play in major markets. Syracuse has a great football tradition going back to the 1950s. Jim Brown, Ernie Davis. Also, North Carolina State playing really good football the past 3 or 4 years, in particular under Dave Doran. Yes, those schools, those football programs have some value. We wanted to differentiate, though, these 7 as being major players, major commodities for the Big Ten and the SEC to review. Please like the video, share these videos out on social media, spread the word about the voice of college football. Make it on back here as we continue to track this and everything else as we get to spring football here very soon. Check out all that we've got available right here at the Voice of College Football.